Hey everyone, this is Gary. I'm off this week visiting the beautiful Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, where hopefully I will not be stranded due to a hurricane. I've hand-selected some of my favorite episodes for you to enjoy this week, which, statistically speaking, I know most of you haven't listened to yet. I will be back again next week fully rested with fresh new episodes for you to enjoy. The Countess Elizabeth Báthory de Ecsed was a Hungarian noblewoman in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. She was highly educated, spoke at least 4 languages, had 8 children, and lived in a palace. And oh, by the way, she was one of the most prolific and sadistic serial killers in world history. Learn more about Elizabeth Báthory, aka the Countess of Blood, on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. Football is back in full swing with another week of epic games. And who's got you covered on the action for every single one of them? DraftKings Sportbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. New customers can bet $5 on football and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. No one's missed out on the action this season. All DraftKings customers can take advantage of 2 new offers every game day this September. Download the DraftKings Sportbook app and use code EVERYTHING to score $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 877-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas, 21 plus age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. See dkng.co/football for eligibility terms and responsible gaming resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. This episode is sponsored by ButcherBox. If you've been listening to this podcast long enough, you know that I'm a big fan of ButcherBox. When my ButcherBox shipment arrives, I feel like a little kid on Christmas morning. When my most recent shipment arrived just a few days ago, I was able to track the package and pick it up as soon as it was delivered. Everything was completely frozen thanks to ButcherBox's innovative shipping system, which ships their meat with dry ice. I moved the meat from the box to my freezer without so much as a hint of thaw. Now I'm good for another month of high-quality steaks and ground beef. Later today, I'm going to be having one of the grass-fed New York strip steaks that was part of my most recent order. If you're looking for high-quality grass-fed beef, pasture-raised chickens, heritage breed cage-free pork, and wild-caught seafood, you have to check out ButcherBox. ButcherBox is giving us a special deal. Sign up today at butcherbox.com/daily and use code DAILY to get $20 off your first order. That's butcherbox.com/daily and use code DAILY to claim this offer. I always try to keep this podcast clean, or as I like to say, as clean as history will allow. This podcast is one of those episodes where the details of history can get quite gory. So if you're eating or have children listening, be forewarned. Elizabeth Báthory was born in 1560 in the town of Nyírbátor in Hungary, in what was at the time the Holy Roman Empire. She was born to a noble family. Her father was the Baron George VI Báthory. From her mother's side of the family, she was related to the King of Poland, the Grand Duke of Lithuania, and the Prince of Transylvania. Outside of her genealogy, much of her early life remains in the realm of legends and stories. Supposedly, she suffered seizures when she was younger and might have had epilepsy. She was highly educated for a woman of that period. In addition to speaking Hungarian, she could speak Latin, Greek, and German. So to summarize her position, she was rich, educated, and of high social rank. She had everything that someone in the late 16th century could possibly hope for. I don't want you to think her life was perfect, but given the circumstances of the period, she was at the very top of the pyramid. Later biographers have posited that she witnessed horrible events take place when she grew up as a child. She might have seen instances of torture and executions take place, although there is no evidence for any of this happening. It's all speculation. We do know that she became pregnant at the age of 13 and had an illegitimate child, the father being a local peasant boy. The child was given to a local family and raised apart from Elizabeth. She was engaged that same year at the age of 13 and was married when she was 15 to the Count Ferenc Nadasdy in what was a pure political marriage. She was married in 1575. Her wedding gift was the castle of Chachitsta, which is today located in Slovakia near the Czech border. Along with the castle was 17 neighboring villages. She was clearly the brains in her family. Her husband, by all accounts, wasn't that smart and was barely literate. He was, however, given the responsibility for all Hungarian troops in a war with the Ottoman Empire, which meant that he was usually gone, leaving Elizabeth to manage affairs herself back home. He was supposedly a sadist himself, with rumors of him torturing Ottoman soldiers, including setting them on fire while alive. There were also rumors that her husband had the peasant boy who got her pregnant at the age of 13 torn apart by dogs. So far, everything I've mentioned about Elizabeth Báthory is not that much different from that of thousands of other noblewomen centuries ago. What made her different began sometime around 1590. It's unknown when it began or who her first victims were. However, at some point, young girls, usually between the age of 10 and 14, were brought to her castle. Many of her first victims were poor peasants. They were enticed to come to the castle to work as maids or servants. However, she soon worked her way up to the daughters of the landed gentry. These would have been people above the peasant class but below the nobility. These girls would have been sent to the castle to learn the rules of etiquette from the countess. Slowly, these girls began disappearing. They were being held in a torture chamber inside the castle and tortured for the countess's amusement. The scope of the torture and abuse seemingly knew no bounds. There were reports of her putting needles under the fingernails of her prisoners. She would use hot objects ranging from coins and keys to hot irons to burn their bodies. Some would be thrust into freezing cold water to suffer hypothermia. There were reports of girls being covered in honey and then being subject to ants and bees. This was on top of the plain old beatings. There were reports that she bit the victims. In at least one case, the breast of one of the girls was cut off, and she was then forced to cook it and eat it. While she was responsible for most of the tortures and murders, she would reportedly also engage in it with her husband when he was around. The stories became even more macabre. She would supposedly drink or bathe in the blood of virgins that she killed, as she thought it preserved her youth, or possibly was a treatment for epilepsy. This went on for years and years. She used at least 4 servants as accomplices in her crimes. Rumors, however, began to spread, and bodies began to appear. The problem was, given the political system at the time, the nobility in a given area that they controlled had almost complete immunity from anything they did. They were the law, and the only way something could be done is if someone went over their head to the emperor. Count Nadasny died in 1604. Without his protection, rumors and accusations against Elizabeth began to spread. In particular, one Lutheran minister named István Magyari began making public accusations against her in public and in the court of the emperor in Vienna. It wasn't until 1610, almost 20 years after her killing and torture spree started, that the Holy Roman Emperor Matthias II began an investigation. He assigned György Thurzó, the Palatine of Hungary, to oversee the investigation. And by the way, the Palatine of Hungary was the ruler of Hungary during the Holy Roman Empire. Thurzó assigned 2 investigators to go and collect evidence. By October 1610, they had 52 witnesses. Then the floodgates opened, and by early 1611, they had over 300 witnesses. In December 1610, they had enough evidence to make an arrest. On December 30th, they headed to the castle, and according to legend, she was caught in the act. The body of several dead girls were found in the castle, and another was in the process of being tortured. Supposedly, she was found covered in blood, but that is thought to be a later embellishment of the story. In the end, her accomplices were all tortured, confessed, and were then executed. Elizabeth Báthory herself was basically just confined to her castle for the rest of her life. Despite her heinous crimes, her punishment was just house arrest. Supposedly, she was walled up in a single room, but there were many accounts of her having free reign of the entire castle grounds. She died in 1614 at the age of 54. Supposedly, she was buried in a nearby cemetery, but the local people objected to having her buried there, and she was moved to her family crypt in Ecsed, Hungary. Today, the location of her tomb is unknown. During the investigation, it was reported that she may have killed between 600 to 650 girls. Even contemporary experts on the subject who think that the number is too high put the number of victims at no less than 80. Supposedly, there was a diary found in the investigation which documented all of the victims, but that has never been found by historians. Today, she is listed by the Guinness Book of World Records as the greatest female serial killer in history. There was another layer to the story beyond just the murders, however. The emperor was Catholic, and Elizabeth Báthory was Protestant. The Báthory family was rich with extensive landholdings, and the emperor was in debt to them. If he could confiscate all of this land and wealth as a punishment, he would get richer and have his debts wiped away. There are a few contemporary researchers who think that the entire affair was nothing more than a conspiracy against Elizabeth Báthory. It was just an imperial plot to confiscate her land and holdings. The problem is that there's just too much evidence, including the evidence found on the premises during the arrest. Also, her first public accuser wasn't Catholic, but Protestant. Moreover, in the end, most of her land and holdings were in fact given to her children after her death. In the 400 years since her death, Elizabeth Báthory has spawned countless legends, and her story has been used in parts of many works of fiction. Her supposedly bathing in blood became a trope for many horror movies, and her drinking blood became a staple for the entire vampire genre. She has actually appeared as a character in many vampire novels. There is an entire Wikipedia page devoted to her references in popular culture. There are dozens and dozens of books, movies, comics, and television shows about her or that were inspired by her. Many subsequent authors who have written about the real historical Elizabeth Báthory have had a hard time dealing with the concept of a female serial killer. There aren't many of them, let alone one who is so prolific. The consensus of most modern criminal psychologists is that she was simply a sadistic psychopath who used her position, power, and wealth to indulge in her desires. It was the power given to her by her aristocratic title which allowed her to conduct her reign of terror unabated, killing hundreds of young girls for over 20 years. The executive producer of Everything Everywhere Daily is Charles Daniel. The associate producers are Thor Thompson and Peter Bennett. I just want to thank everyone, including the show's producers, who support the show over on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show, just head over to patreon.com, which is currently the only place where you can get show merchandise. Also, if you want to talk to other listeners about the show, head over to our Facebook group or Discord server, both of which have links in the show notes.